Hey. So let's talk a little bit about the Glance interoperable image import. It's here. We got MVP out, so few pointers how to use it and some problems we are facing at the moment. So my name is Erno Kuvaja. I'm working for Red Hat, long-time Glance core, and one of the people who were implementing the MVP for this cycle.
Yeah, I'm Brian Rossmeda. I'm the PTL of Glance for this cycle. And I'm here mostly for moral support. Erno's driving this. He did most of the implementation.
So what we are gonna walk through is basic idea what is the new image import workflow, and why we did that, and how you can actually start using it now. So it's a replacement for the current image upload, and this feature has been under planning for a long time. We started about 2.5 years ago, the discussion, and one big part of driving that was the Trademark group wanted to have image upload as one of the things so that you can call your cloud as a OpenStack cloud. And the current method was just problematic. There was big cloud operators who were saying that, hey, we cannot do this. So we had to figure out a way to provide mechanism what we can use, and options for different use cases to provide that for their users. And the biggest change what will happen is that we are moving from the 2-call image upload to 2 to 3 calls. So the image create call, API call, will be the same call as it is now. It's providing an extra header when it's enabled, and that extra header tells that the new image import workflow is enabled and it's consumable. And
so with I don't know how many, hopefully everybody's used Glance v2, maybe almost exclusively. So in Glance, it's a two-stage process where you create the image record. And so you can start manipulating that right away, add extra metadata to it if you want, and get everything ready. And then there's a second, the reason you do that is you create the image record, then you get an image ID that you can work with. And then you put your image data to that image record, it gets associated, and then away you go. Glance will make the image active. So the big problem we've had is that in some small clouds, you might not care what your users upload because you can trust them all and you know where you can find them in their office if they do something bad. But as clouds get larger, you have different requirements and may have different levels of trust for your users. So the challenge with this was to come up with, as Erno was saying, an interoperable way to be very flexible with respect to how stuff gets into your cloud, but make it regimented enough that it would be interoperable among various OpenStack clouds. So as we go on, you'll see how we think we've solved this problem.
So currently we have MVP out. It was released in Pike. It's experimental API. It's not enabled per default, but it's usable there. You can start testing it and see how the new workflow goes. So currently we have the second call after you have created the image record, is that you are going to stage your data. So we have a stage endpoint, and you put your data there, and the image will not go directly active. So we expect that third call coming in, which is the import call, that tells Glance that, hey, we have the data in place. You can go and process it however you need to get the image to the active stage. And this is the current situation. We are bringing in multiple ways to provide that data to Glance, which is the reason why this is 2 to 3 calls. So when we get forward, I'll explain it a little bit closer. Actually, a little bit back there. So one note there is that when you do the import call, it's asynchronous. So it will return you 202 right away. It does not mean that the image is ready to be consumed. It might take time, so it needs that whoever is creating that image and is planning to consume it need to follow the status of the image until it goes active before trying to consume that image from Glance.
So the main point is, instead of going directly to the back end, the image data is going to a staging area, and that gives the operator an opportunity to examine it. So you can run various tests on it if you want to, either just check the format to make sure it's correct, or actually mount it somewhere and try to, it just depends on what your use cases are and what you need to do relative to your user base. And then after all that stuff's done, the image, if it passes, would be put into the back end, and then it would go active. So it's going to be up to the user. So it's asynchronous. You'll get a 202 back saying that the import call succeeded. But then as far as the image actually becoming available to be consumed, that's going to depend on the particular cloud and what they're doing. But you can poll the image response to wait to see when it goes active.
Yeah, and we have a little bit more on that, how it actually works under the hood.
Sure.
Is it possible to, after an image is on active, is it possible to deactivate an image?
So yes. So there's a, right, and this is kind of associated with this. You may be in a situation where if you're allowing end users to import any kind of images that they want, that one might be reported as a spam image or something dangerous. So there is a call in the API that was added maybe 4 cycles ago to deactivate an image. So there's deactivate and reactivate. And what it does is the image record is there, the status shows as deactivated, and you can't download it. So it'll show up in searches. We tried to design this so it's not like a pejorative thing. It's just sort of, you're under investigation maybe. You're just deactivated. So at that point, you can't download the image data. So Nova tries to boot from it. It won't be able to do that until it gets reactivated. And those are admin calls.
Those are admin.
Yeah.
They're governed by policy, but admin by default,
Yeah.
right?
So they're most likely admin calls just about everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
One should assume they're admin calls.
Yes, you shouldn't assume that you can do it, and you'll probably never be able to reactivate your own image unless, because if you allow users to reactivate their own images, you might as well not bother to deactivate them in the first place.
At some point, I'm going to get you drunk and tell you why I would love to be able to do both of those.
Yeah.
Well, luckily you can
remove a database, but
you can configure
Sure.
your cloud so you can do that. So that's cool.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. No worries. So yeah, the latest Glance client actually supports what we have out there now. So we have those commands available. We have the image create responses correctly. We have the stage command that will utilize the new staging endpoint and upload the data there. And we have the image import also available on Glance client. And just like you can currently run image create, provided all the metadata information needed and the actual data payload via -- file or std in, we have a combination call as well, which is image -create via -import, and that will exercise the whole import workflow from the client on a single command. So it's trying to be as easily consumable for the end user as possible. And then we have the import info call on the client as well, which is exercising the Discoverability API, what I'm going to talk a little bit later as well. And so again, re-pointing out that it's not going to be active as soon as the call ends like it's currently. So that's the big difference, what end user will see happening there. And image show will give the status of the image. It will stay, I think, importing after the import call until the importing process has finished, and then the image status will go active. And at that point, the image is consumable by Nova Cinder, downloadable by the user via client as well. And one part of the work and why we have spent so much time on this is that we wanted to provide multiple sources for the image. So the currently implemented is the one called Glance Direct, which enables the staging endpoint and allows user to upload the data to Glance. So we're very similar as the current upload is. And then we have, for this cycle, Queens, one of the most looked after or asked after features of Glance Images API version 2 was the copy from Images API version 1. And as it had, as it is, security issue on its behavior, we had to redesign it a little bit, and that's something what we are planning to merge in Queen's release. So that will be the second source option, how to provide the image data at Glance.
Let's see. Just a reminder, if you haven't been to our many other talks at this summit, the Images API v1 is scheduled to be removed during this cycle. So v2 will be the only one available. So the old copy from functionality was pretty much the only thing that was left that v1 had that v2 didn't have. So once we've implemented the HTTP download image import method, we'll have pretty much functional equivalence and be able to delete v1. Yes?
How do you expect it to be more secure?
We do have a link on one of these slides coming up.
Yeah,
we could,
so I'll get back to that in a bit.
Yeah.
And the third source option that was kind of mandated around the discussions is a use case where the operator don't necessarily want to expose the Glance API node for the upload process, and we have this option called Swift Local. So the end user can upload their image data to their own account Swift and provide that information to Glance, and then Glance can use the resources to process, take it from Swift, run it through the import process, and continue from there. And the two later ones, the HTTP download and the Swift Local, are they're basically two call processes. So as you don't do the actual upload call, your image creation will be only two API calls.
This is actually not a new question that applies to all of what you're standing here, so I'm going to ask you.
Right.
When you're importing from Swift, you put your stuff in Swift and you import, or you do this. Do you need to leave the object? Does it create a reference in Glance?
No, Glance will take the image down, do whatever it needs to be done, and push it on the backend that has been configured. So we don't leave it. It just to make it a little bit easier for the user. So user might have that data already in Swift, so they don't need to download it and re-upload to Glance.
So the one could clean the data out
Right.
once you're happy that it's in Glance.
Yes.
That's the way we're designing it. So, yes.
I've been 100% sure and I've never remembered to ask you, so
Right.
like, I'll clean them up later.
Yeah, no, right, because you don't want to leave a lot of stuff lying around. So this will give operators a lot of flexibility, because depending on the size of your Glance nodes, you may or may not want a lot of people uploading stuff to it. So if that's the case, then you can use the Swift Local. You may not want people using copy from at all, because they're bringing just weird stuff in that you don't want to allow, so you don't have to do that. So the idea is we have three precisely defined methods to get stuff into a cloud, and to get the brand, well, this is going to be assuming the interoperability group approves this and decides to make it part of the trademark stuff. Which,
The loudest possible version of my voice that I'm in favor of.
right. So it's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So the idea is an operator is expected to expose one of these. You could expose all of them if you want. It's up to you. But as long as you expose one, that would satisfy the interoperability requirements.
Somewhere in there, it's returned you the list of available options.
Right.
Yeah, we get to that. So to the import call itself and the asynchronous behavior of it is one thing what we haven't implemented yet, and it's under works now, is to provide the hooks into our task flow to operators being able to define their own tasks, what they want those images to go through. Something like virus checks or perhaps automatic image conversion, so you could allow users upload their images on whatever image format you can deal with. But if you use, for example, Ceph on the back end that would prefer everything being raw, now we can actually do that before we activate the image and have that seamless and just making users' life more easy depending how the operator decides to configure that. And one big point of this is that the tasks are not user selectable. So user has no influence what tasks are run there. That's purely how the operator wants to run it. And we have no plans to allow users making the call what tasks are run or not.
We're trying to make it as similar to the old upload as possible. So users who were able to do the upload, they just gave you the data and away, and it magically showed up in Glance and they could boot instances from it. And that's going to be the same thing here. So
yeah, it just makes it more flexible for different deployments to actually have something usable in their Glance without making the life really difficult for their users and making their users do all that stuff behind the scenes. And then we have the discoverability. So this is new part of the API. It's the endpoint is /info/import, and that endpoint provides when the 2.6 API is enabled. So if you haven't enabled the experimental API, this will return 404 like it was on the previous release. And when it's enabled, we tell what methods are available. This is also returned on the header on the image create call, but we have a specific endpoint. You can query what kind of things I can do with my Glance. And
no, it's off the V2. Yeah, we forgot to include the. We're so excited about there only being one API, we forgot to mention the.
And we are extending it. At the moment, it really just returns the method available. But the whole idea of this endpoint is to extend the information what we provide to be meaningful, so that the user can make a educated guess or to expect that their image creation will succeed on the first time instead of just going trial and error.
Brilliant. Everyone can do that.
And then we come to the part that operators might not be so happy about. So to make this all happen, we need to do quite a bit of more configuration, and that configuration will be mandatory. And so first of all, when the direct upload is enabled, there needs to be that staging area configured for the Glance API node. And when you are running multiple Glance APIs, you need to have currently a shared file system between those nodes. This is using the Glance store file store driver, and we don't have yet any other implementation. So you need to provide the share file system to those nodes, because your import call might go to some other node, and when that other node don't find the image data, it cannot do the import. So that's just something to keep in mind while testing it on the first place. And because we use the image ID as well on the file name, you should not share that staging area with the current cache path or the file system image store if your Glance is configured as such, because that will just cause an issues in down the line. And the sizing of that is how much space you allocate for it. We really can't say any best practice for that because it depends so much of what size images your cloud is normally processing, how much new images are uploaded, and all that. So it's something you need to think about carefully, that you have sufficient space there to be able to process those images before Glance cleans it up after the image is uploaded to the backend.
Just as sort of a side point here, the image upload will still exist. So as far as trusted users like Nova or Cinder who are going to push images to Glance, they can just use the image upload. So you can configure it by policy so that the services are using the old technique. So it's not going to put as much stress on. So the staging area has to be sufficiently sized so that stuff fits in there, and you don't want it to overlap with your actual store. But not everything is going to have to go through this direction. So it's going to depend on what size images your users upload, whether your users even bother to do this. So I've known some clouds where we vastly overestimated how much people would use this, and we just didn't see that much traffic. So that's why we're being a little bit vague about exactly what you need to do. So it's really going to be dependent on your cloud and what the usage characteristics are.
Yeah, and the tasks that are running on the import call might need a workspace as well. For example, the copy from will need a space where it can store the image data before it's pushed on the backend. And this is something, depending on the usage patterns as well and how you are using those tasks in there, that you might want to share that, and we will definitely allow sharing that path, and you can use just the same file path or same file system, utilizing those workspaces for the tasks and the staging. We have currently the enable image import configuration option in Glance, and in Pike it's false by default. We don't enable it because it needs configuration and it's experimental API. In Queens, our plan is that it's going to be false by default, and it will enable the feature on the current API. And this gives the possibility to run the stable API, configure it how you feel comfortable. But this makes the upgrade path a little bit easier there. So if you upgrade your system and you don't want to configure it right away, you want to take time to evaluate it, but run the latest code, that's possible. And that option there is deprecated already. We introduced it, deprecated. It's there only to bring that seamless upgrade path. And on a Rocky, we are going to flip that to true by default. And we expect that when you upgrade to Rocky, you either flip it to false if you haven't configured all the rest yet, or you configure the workspaces and the staging area what you need. And on S-release, we will be going and removing this, and the API itself will be just presented, and there is no way to turn it off. And the methods themselves are operator configurable option. So the Glance Direct, Swift Local, HTTP download, it's a list. So you can have one item there, you can have 3 items there, and it defines what operations Glance will allow, and also what kind of information that the discoverability point will provide the end user. And those 3 are the ones that we have planned and designed to be used. There is no technical reasons to limit it to these 3, but there is lots of social and political reasons to try to limit so that we don't go just totally crazy and suddenly we have 27 different ways to do this. So the whole point is maybe someday in the future there might be a legit reason why the current methods of providing that data are not suitable anymore, and we might introduce a new one. So there is no technical limitations for that, but those are the ones we are sticking for now. And back to that, yes. how the HTTP download will be more secure is we are providing filtering there. So one of the big problems with the copy from was that it enabled to use glance effectively as a port scanner. You provided URIs, and glance went and poked that URI, and when you are creating multiple images and just incrementing your ports, you end up to the situation where whatever happens to response ends up to be a file in glance as an image, and you can, after that, go and inspect what those images actually provided in. So we are planning to give filtering as a whitelisting so that the operator can specify only set of host or IP addresses where you can actually, what you can use for the copy from, or blacklisting, just blocking known bad sources, and a port validation as well. So the plan is to by default, allow it only access ports 80 and 443. If there is a reason to whitelist some other local web service giving that image data on non-normal port, that will be possible by configuration, but default will be only those two ports. And special thing for people who are writing tooling, accessing the API itself, is the discoverability endpoint will always provide the available methods of importing the data. Do not expect that that's the only field that it will respond. We are extending more information in there, so expect that there might be size limits, what is maximum size of the image, there is limits on container types, etc., coming in there, and we will grow that information as we see needed and useful for the users to make that call and providing them information that is actually valuable.
There's the spec for the image import process outlines what the info is going to look like, so you can get a sense of that. So right now, the only information it returns is what methods are available, since it's the experimental API. But by the end of the cycle, it'll give a full response. So you can get a sense of what that's going to look like if you look at the spec.
Yeah. And a big change that this brings to our immutability statement is that the data what you upload into Glance might be a different data what you end up having as an active image. So because we have that task flow there, we can do stuff like automatic conversion of image formats, and that will bring the situation that the data what you upload might not be the same data what you download from Glance. Our immutability statement still stays as in once the image goes active, the image data won't change anymore. And that's just something which is really, really important to understand, because at the moment, you can trust that when you upload the image to Glance and you download that image afterwards, unless there's something went horribly wrong, you get that same data and your signature. You can basically take a signature of your data and verify it against signature what Glance gives. That will not be the case anymore if those tasks are configured to modify that data. So then we have a little bit problematic situation at the moment. So if you take Devstack, you kick it up from Pike or master, and you configure Glance to enable this API, The create call will work as it should. The staging call will work as it should. And the import call will just hang. And the problem with that is that Devstack decided to go and deploy us under ModWhiskey, and our task engine does not work under ModWhiskey. So we have a workaround for it at the moment. You can go and take Okata Devstack, and after the stack comes up, you upgrade Glance into latest or into a Pike, and you will be able to exercise this feature. And the long-term solution for this is, unfortunately, for some who felt really opinionated that we need to run under Whiskey container, but the work to make that happen and have our tasking working within that environment is something we don't have resources to do, so we will need to propose a patch to Devstack to revert that decision and run Glance independently as a eventlet again.
Is it any whiskey? So like if it was like uWhiskey or any of those things, it would be just bad?
They just can't handle the eventlets monkey patching what it needs, and it's basically buried all over the API code. So we just unfortunately don't have the way to put the resources in and change all that so that it would work. And as mentioned at the beginning, only the file store is currently supported for the staging. So that means that if you're using, for example, NFS, you got to make sure that NFS is mounted before you bring Glance up, as the file store will go and lock itself up if it cannot write to the store when Glance starts. So just something to know that Glance must be able to write to that path where the staging is at the point when it starts. And the third one is that unfortunately there is no mechanism yet to start experimenting with those operator tasks, what we mentioned, because we don't have those hooks implemented yet. And that's it in a nutshell. Questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. This is a lot of
Yeah.
information.
Oh, yes.
The spec is available. It's, I think, about 40 pages, so it's a huge document to read through. So there's lots of discussion around it. So yeah, please feel free to ask for any clarifications. I do not expect you to go and read that to digest all of this.
So the place, we should have put this on the slide. The places to look, in the API reference, there is a description of interoperable image import that'll give you a quick summary, well, maybe a more detailed summary of what we've just discussed about which operations, which API calls you use, and how it's designed. There's also the spec, which is quite long, because there's a lot of discussion in there, that will give you an indication of what this is going to look like at the end of Queens. And then there's a section in the Glance admin guide that describes how to configure this if you want to run it just to experiment with what the experimental API is like.
But shoot.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm concerned about the workflow for the user.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go again to that slide where you describe the Glance image create, Glance image stage?
Right.
So now
This one?
as a user, I try to import an image, create an image in Glance. I need to go through all those steps.
Yes, or
So on API perspective, yes. Like I mentioned, as a Glance client, we implemented the single call. You just, image create via import. You give it the mandatory properties, and you give it a file as a -- file argument and path, or you pipe it to the STD in, and it will just go through all of that, and then you can just poll until the image becomes up.
It means that the users that until now were doing Glance image create will need to do the new command.
right.
This it's a learning process.
What's
So the users up until now might have been able to use image create, but if anything that wanted to do multiple work yes, it is a learning curve, but also it should.
Well, I'm thinking about my users on the cloud that till now they are doing glance image create, but they need to do one another.
Totally. So
Yeah, and what we have tried to do is to make that transition as smooth as possible. So if you are exposing V2 API at the moment, your users are using image create and piping it all into a one command, you should be able to just replace that image create with image create via import, and everything else stays the same. They hit enter, and they will end up with 202 response back where the image states that it's importing. And the big change there is that they need to then poll and see until the image goes active before they can consume it.
also the current put-based method won't go away unless you turn it off.
Yeah, exactly. So
This is
You
a
could,
new
right.
additional mechanism that some clouds may choose to turn the other one off and only use this one. But if you're running a cloud for your users, you don't have to turn off put-based uplift.
Well, it will be remotely blocked, right?
It'll always
Or
be there
well-
because of Nova or whatever.
yeah,
Right.
so we are not going to remove that, but there is a policy what you can use to turn it off if you are running a big public cloud and you don't want your users to do that. If you want your users to keep using the old method, feel free. You don't need to turn it off.
My other question is about the glance image stage. So it means that until now my glance nodes are very, very small.
Right.
Because everything is streamed in for the Pike storage.
Right.
With this is unpredictable.
Correct.
Right? This is optional, I imagine, because
Right.
So
Well,
it's optional in a sense that you would need to be able to use the trademark once that exercise finishes and it actually goes into those trademark rules. You would need to be enable either the glance direct or Swift local method to be able to use the OpenStack trademark. But that's in the future. Yeah,
Right,
that's far in the future, but that has been the main driver why we have gone through this whole exercise was because of the trademarking and the demands what we got from that side.
But that's all very speculative because it's got to go through all the normal approval processes.
Yeah.
So,
Noting for what it's worth, both Shade and the Python OpenStack SDK libraries, as well as the Ansible modules, and I believe that means also the Salt modules, will all expose the thing that is available on the cloud as a single call. So if you're using, and I believe we should be able to get that done in Python OpenStack client, the OpenStack family client as well, because we can merge some stuff there. So hopefully in the supporting tooling, we should be able to expose this as a a thing that will do the right thing for the cloud.
Yeah.
That's enabled. So by the time you get to the point where you just have to have it, hopefully.
And hopefully at that time as well, we are able to support whatever glance driver you want to use for that staging area. So you can still have your glance node lightweight and have external storage what it uses for the staging.
Okay, because the glance direct, if I remember well, it's the parameter for the clients or the Swift store, right?
right.
It's a parameter for the clients, glance clients, or is it a configuration option?
No, it's configured by the.
So it's configuration option, which one you enable, and the client needs to, on the import call, specify which one of the available methods was used and specify where that data is available. So if you use glance direct, the import call needs to tell glance that, hey, we used glance direct, go and pick it up from the staging area. If the Swift local was used, the client needs to specify on the import call that we used Swift local, and here is the URI where you can pick that data up. But that's the part what we are trying to hide from the end user. That's more of the API details than the actual end user affecting
lives, or does it have to, like, does it have to then get downloaded by the Glance server and re-uploaded to Swift in a different spot?
That's something we need to figure out. I think
probably
with
gonna have to
with
be-
multi-tenant Swift,
We don't want to do that.
yeah. So it could be a problematic, especially because
Well, the idea, we want the generic workflow to be, you bring it to an examination area, and then you would put it where it goes. And with Swift, there's the configuration option that Glance owns all the stuff, or the multi-tenant option where it goes into the tenant space. But Glance has to know exactly where it's stored. So we'll see exactly how this goes.
I don't know, honestly, I don't know the answer to the question. Would you be able to maybe have something in the Swift driver that would use the Swift server-side copy rather than?
that's something what I thought as well, but we need to see because it might be weird, and the other problem with that is that at that point we need to have some indicator coming through the task flow, identifying the driver at the end, that the data has not been modified and it can just go and do it on the back end. Optimization, yes, maybe. Do we have a design for it now and means to do it now? No. And sorry, we are a couple of minutes over time already, so we are going to finish on this. Feel free to continue with us on the outside. I'll be at least there answering any further questions.
And you can
Thank you
always
so
find
much.
us in IRC, so in the OpenStack Glance channel.
Yeah.
So, thanks.